Today, South Africa commemorates Women's Day as a tribute to the 20,000 women who marched the Union buildings on the 9th of August 1956 in protest against the extension of past laws to women. The South African government declared August Women's Month. Now, despite impressive strides towards appointing more women into leadership positions through the Employment Equity Act and affirmative action, women continue to experience challenges in dispensing their management responsibilities. Now, to look at some of these challenges that women continue to face in modern-day South Africa, we are joined in studio by Dr. Amaleya Goneos, a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of Pretoria. Doctor, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
Let's go back 1994 till today. What advances have women made?
Well, I think one of the fundamental things when I look at it is obviously the significance of the march in 1956, but looking at it from a parliamentary point of view in terms of progress, pre-1994 there were less than 3% of women in parliament. 1994 we had 27%. 1999 we had moved on to 30%. Then in 2004 33%. 2009 raised up to 44%, and in 2014 we dipped down to 40%. We're now at about 42.3% in terms of women's representation in Parliament. And that's really significant. If you compare us to other countries across the globe, Rwanda obviously ranks at the top of the lead in terms of the Interparliamentary Union. They're at 63.8% representation of women. Senegal coming in at 6%, and South Africa, a joint between Mexico and South Africa in 7th position. But other countries like the US and the UK, US ranks 96 in the world at only 19% representation of women. France is in at 60 with 26%, and the UK is ranked 48 with only 26%.
So we are not doing so bad, are we?
We're doing very well. And that's incredibly important, because when you have women in leadership positions from a government point of view, it's a way of being able to empower components through from a legislation point of view. You already mentioned the Employment Equity Act. And obviously from that point of view, we're looking at equal pay for work of equal value, which is incredibly important. So that it says is really a significant aspect from legislation changes, and the reason that women have managed to advance as far as they have, if we look back from 1994 or even pre-1994, is the fact that we've got enabling legislation coming through. And one of the most significant areas of legislation was the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill, which unfortunately the bill lapsed in Parliament, but that is a very significant piece of thinking about being able to capacitate women so that we have got a point of view of 50-50 in terms of women in decision-making capability.
Fast strides within government, but that's a government perspective. What about business?
Business, different scenario there, unfortunately. We're lagging. In 2012, there was a census done by a businesswoman in South Africa, and that looked at women's representation across the JSE. There are only 3.6% female CEOs in JSE-listed companies. On a management level, executive management level, that went to 21.7%. But again, if you do a comparison between figures from South African point of view across the rest of the world, in 2015, Grant Thornton, they usually do an annual survey in terms of women's representation, and they demonstrated that on average across the globe, there are only 22% of women within senior management positions. In South Africa, according to their stats, we had 27%. So although we are higher than the benchmark, it is still too low. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, in terms of historic reasons of women coming into the workforce. Two, male-dominated positions, pervading stereotypes that continue to go through in terms of society. And coupled to that, I mean, if we look back in terms of some of the significant movements, we had the first wave of feminism, which was sort of in the 1920s. In the 1970s, so between 1960 and 1980, that was the second wave of feminism. And that was really looking at how we could have gender equality coming through, and women were really standing up for their rights. Because for a long time, women were incredibly discriminated against. And we had, see, the 1956 march. You had various marches in Iceland, for instance, 24th of October in 1975, where they had 20 to 25,000 women hand down their tools, whether they were housewives or in the work environment, and marched into Reykjavik to demonstrate that women's rights matter. And that was a significant movement. I think we have to look at the rights issues first and then look at the enabling factors in the workplace.
We still have a very patriarchal society, and some men argue that women lack the skills and preparation for leadership positions, while women argue, on the other hand, that they are professionally isolated and not integrated into male leadership structures. Why is that, you think?
Well, I heard an interesting quote from one of the ministers that I interviewed on my radio program, Humanity, Women and Unity. And one of the things she said, you know, when we came into Parliament, it was a case of, well, black people don't know how to lead. She said we all came in on an equal level, but it was a case of coming in and jumping in at the deep end, getting your hands dirty and moving ahead. So it's the same scenario. It's just looking at it instead of from a race point of view, it's from a gender perspective. Women have got the capacity, they have got the leadership skills, but it's also about being able to have that education and being able to advance and be given the opportunity. We continuously hear about things like the glass ceiling. It's about moving ahead and out of that glass ceiling. And you look at women across the world, the likes of a Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook, or Marissa Mayer, CEO of Yahoo, who are really demonstrating on a global level the capability that women have. On Sheryl Sandberg, for instance, she talks about the fact that, you know, don't leave before you leave, sit at the table, lean in. So really putting your foot forwards,
yes,
and standing up. And the other area is that there are almost different ways and judgments in terms of how women are perceived versus men are being perceived. So, instance, in terms of likability and success, they're positively correlated for men but negatively correlated for women. So a woman who is assertive is often seen as aggressive,
yes,
where a man could put through the same behavior and that's acceptable.
In your view, Doctor, is the modern day woman, you think, maybe paving the way for future generations?
I think every generation paves the way. I think that when we're looking at where we are today, I don't think it's a better time, never been a better time to be a woman. But the case in point is that we are walking on the shoulders of the giants who've gone before us. So there is progress continuously, and it's up to us not to become complacent, but to hand over to the next generation and ensure that their life becomes even easier, and we get to a point where we have 50-50 and there is absolute equality across genders.
Well, if it was 1956, they would say, Watinta Bafasi, Watinta Bogoto. Doctor, thank you so much for your time and joining us.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Amaleya Goneos, a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of Pretoria. Now, earlier, just before the break, we engaged Dr. Amaleya Goneos Malka, a postgraduate doctoral research fellow at the University of Pretoria. But we didn't say goodbye to her. We said, stay a little longer, because there's a critical question that I still need to pose to her. She's back in studio with us. A very good morning to you once again.
Thank you.
Now, Doctor, the last time we spoke, we talked about a patriarchal society. But is it not time, though, that we change that perspective and make it more a matriarchal society? Your thoughts?
I would say that we'd be going from one extreme then to the next. But what I do think is that we need to do is start engaging. We've always talking about how women are putting their foot forwards, how they're moving ahead. But what we need to do, it's almost as a fundamental rewiring in society. In order for women to progress, men also have to come to the party as well. So it's looking at, and gender is it's a social construct. So we can create and change social and cultural interpretations of what gender is defining us to be.
But looking at politics, are we not perhaps maybe going in that direction and going to the other end of the stick to a matriarchal society, when we look at political leaders around the globe, Angela Merkel, we look at the new British Prime Minister, we look at possibly for the US, Hillary Clinton, and of course in Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, maybe perhaps here in South Africa as well. But isn't that perhaps where we're going?
Potentially as a trend, but still, if you look at the numbers in terms of percentage of female leaders to male leaders, it is still biased towards men. But maybe it's about looking at some of the qualities and the attributes that women bring into the environment. I came across an interesting article the other day on an Icelandic company called Alcor Capital, and it was a group of women who started a financial services organization in Iceland just after the 2007-2008 collapse. And they said, if you look at the responsibility, most of the Wall Street, etc., were all governed from a male point of view. And what they wanted to do was bring in feminine values into the financial sector. So their set of values consisted of risk awareness, telling things as it is, emotional capital, profit with principles, and applying from a female lens on being able to introduce greater sustainability, because they understand from perspectives of traditionally women have worked within the home environment, unpaid labor, but providing a great set of values in terms of nurturing and bringing up the next generation and being able to apply some of those principles in the work environment.
Now, talking about those principles and emotional capital, very important point, but what sort of kind of female attributes should women bring into leadership positions, especially in a male-dominated work environment?
I think what we have to recognize is that women and men are different. There's no question about it. We look at equality from the point of view of equal opportunities being available, but people bring different attributes. And there's a study by Credit Suisse which demonstrates that through diversity, the bottom line of organizations who have got an equitable ratio of men to women performed better, because you bring in those different values. So it's a complementary case as opposed to a competitive case and a take-all.
Doctor, once again, thank you so much for your time and joining us here in studio.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Amaleya Goneos Malka. It's a double-barrel surname that you see there. She's a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of Pretoria, joining us in studio. But, you know, going from women to the weather and how the weather affects us today here on this wonderful Women's Day, let's find out from Phil. How's the weather?